So our first step in making fresh plant tincture is to select really fresh, good quality plant material. And you want to be sure that you've harvested it at its optimal time. And so here we have fresh yarrow, which has just come into blossom. It's beautiful and fragrant and really vital. Once a plant has gone brown or died back, we don't really want to harvest it at that point. Now, there are different varieties of yarrow. There's white yarrow, which I have here. There's pink yarrow, there's yellow, fuchsia, even purple. But for herbal medicine, we want to use a variety that is closest to its wild nature, and that is white yarrow. The bitter principle is highest, and also those lovely aromatics, which are really pungent and potent, are highest in the white variety. I'm going to zero out my scale and weigh the plant material. And here I have 100 grams. And with fresh plant material, it's a 1:2 ratio when we're preparing a fresh plant extract. This is the point where you want to be sure that you have your notebook, your pencil, and a calculator. Because even though the math is really simple, when you've got so many things happening on your counter space, you want to be sure that you're taking notes for your own records, but also to be sure that you've got your math correct. So I've got 100 grams of my plant material, and using the standard method, I'm going to multiply that by 2. So that's 100 grams times 2, which gives me 200 milliliters of liquid. And in this case, my menstruum is brandy. Now, if you live in an area where you can obtain 95% alcohol easily, you could use that, which is again following in the steps of what a clinical practitioner or someone who's really committed to medicine making might do. But that said, if you don't have access to 95%, just be sure that you're using a minimum of 40% or 50%, which would be ideal. And that's because fresh plant material naturally has some water content. And I'm going to show you a little later how to measure the alcohol content so that you don't have to worry, do I have enough to keep it preserved? And the minimum amount of alcohol that needs to be present in order to ensure that your product does not go off and it can be preserved is 20 to 25% alcohol. So next what I'm going to do is blend the plant material. And the reason I'm doing that rather than just chopping is because I want to make sure that this is cut down to its finest cut so that it can be covered by the menstruum. Now, it's absolutely okay to have some of the smaller stems and leaves of yarrow because they still contain some of the medicine, and there's not a lot of stem present here. Next, we're going to measure out our liquid. So 200 milliliters. And then we're going to blend and see how this covers our herb. So let's take a look. Now what I'm going to be looking at is how successful was or is the menstruum at covering this plant material. It's almost there, but not quite. So here's the real life practice of being a medicine maker and a herbalist, which is constantly troubleshooting and amending your recipes to make them work. So this is barely, just ever so slightly covering the plant material, but I'm going to want to add a little bit more menstruum. So I'm going to measure out 100 milliliters of the alcohol, and here I'm using brandy. The reason I'm using brandy is I personally really like the flavor, and I find most of my clients enjoy the flavor and the fragrance. It's a really readily available brandy, and near where I live, there's a maker that makes brandy from organic grown apples, which is just so special. So I'm going to measure this out. And really important is to make a note while you're doing all these adjustments. I'm going to put my calculator aside and just jot down added an extra 100 ml. The benefit of doing all these little steps again is so that you can repeat it next time or know what happened, let's say next summer when yarrow is ready to be harvested, what method actually worked in making that tincture that was so beautiful the year before. I'm going to give it a quick blend. And we'll take a look. And I think just one more addition of 100 ml is going to do it. And once again, a quick blend. And I'll just say here that if these steps don't appeal to you, of course we could have made this the folk method, which is simply chopping or putting your herb in a blender and covering with any amount of alcohol it takes to cover. All right, so this looks good. And I'm going to make a note that I added that second 100 ml. So then what that means is our ratio has been 1 part herb to 4 parts menstruum, or 400 milliliters. So I'm going to note that down, that it's a 1 to 4, where I used 100 grams of fresh material and 400 milliliters of brandy. Next, what I'm going to do is put my plant material into a wide mouth canning jar. And I'm going to use one of my favorite kitchen tools, which is this wide mouth funnel, which you can get at most kitchen supply shops. And we'll just pour it right in there. And lift the funnel out, and you can see here that the plant is nicely covered. Now, you might notice that there is some of the blended material sitting at the surface, but the longer this sits, the more the plant material will naturally release its medicinal virtues and begin to settle at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is just fasten a lid. And some of my favorite lids, again, found at most kitchen supply shops, are these plastic canning jar lids. And that just saves you from having to find the ring and then the insert to the ring, which if your kitchen is like mine, it's really hard to find two that actually match. And there's no contraindication or concern about a plastic lid being put with the herb and the alcohol. And then next, we put on our label. And then I'm just going to make a note on my label that it's a 1 to 4. So here I have my 1 to 4 fresh plant tincture using brandy, the fresh yarrow, and set here in this canning jar, brought right up to surface, and this is a 2-cup canning jar. Some of the benefits of yarrow that I've used with great success, it's one of my favorite herbs for excess menstrual bleeding. And that could be for anyone during their menstrual years, and most especially for people going through perimenopause. It's an astringent, and it's also called a styptic, and that is a herb that slows or even arrests excess bleeding. My other favorite use is for urinary tract infections or any kind of urinary irritation or agitation. Because of the natural volatile oils or essential oils that are in the blossoms, it's also a great herb that is a carminative, so that moves stagnation in our digestion. I talk a lot about digestion because it's the backbone of our health. It's also really great for any irritations or inflammations on the skin. And it all around just helps to warm your body in a really lovely way and helps to improve the integrity of your veins. So if you have a history of varicose veins or any concern with boggy tissue, this is a really great herb. And lastly, because it's so aromatic, it's excellent for the respiratory system and is a really wonderful antimicrobial. I love to use it in my cough formulas or really anything for the respiratory system. So I'm going to let this macerate for a minimum of 2 weeks, but my preference is 4 weeks, and I'm going to store it somewhere in a cool, dark place. It doesn't need to be in the refrigerator because alcohol is such a good preservative. I'm just going to let it sit and do its thing, and then after that 4-week period of time, I'm going to decant it. That is separating the marc from the menstruum. The marc is that spent material, and then the menstruum will be our beautiful tincture that will bottle up in a amber glass jar, and that could have a plastic lid or even a little dropper. Next, let's move on to making a dried cinnamon tincture.